During the island vacation, someone fell into the water. Joss, without hesitation, plunged in to save them. Their daughter, who witnessed the whole event, excitedly called her dad a hero who saves people. That night, after putting our daughter to sleep, I waited for him to return from accompanying the person who fell into the water to the hospital. Sign here. Seeing the figure push open the door, I handed over the signed divorce agreement. Joss looked exhausted at first. But when he saw the document I handed him, his pupils suddenly contracted. He looked up at me in shock. Honey, what do you mean by this? I didn't answer him. Instead, I calmly pointed to the agreement and said, custody of our daughter goes to me, we split our joint assets evenly, and you cash out your shares in the company to me. Before I could finish speaking, Joss grabbed the divorce papers and tossed them aside. His Adam's apple bobbed violently, his emotions spiraling out of control. Why bring up divorce all of a sudden? I smiled faintly, finally lifting my eyes to meet his. Sudden? How could that compare to Zia's sudden attempt to end her life? Hearing Zia's name, Joss froze. I said no more, instead staring at him with cold indifference. After a long moment, a bitter smile tugged at the corner of Joss's mouth, carrying a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted. He said, so you already know? Yes, I knew everything. The story between him and Zia. 2 weeks ago, on my way to pick up my daughter from kindergarten, a woman blocked my path. She was young, probably in her 20s. She said, Bree, can we talk? My daughter blinked her big eyes, curiously studying this unfamiliar and uninvited guest. I patted her head and looked up at the woman. Do you mind if I take my daughter home first? After all, she was still young, and some dirty matters were really not suitable for her to hear. The woman seemed a bit surprised by my calm demeanor but still nodded. After settling my daughter, the woman and I sat face to face in the cafe. She said nothing, only staring at me intently, as if waiting for me to be the first to ask her something. I lifted my coffee and took a slow sip. The burnt taste I used to dislike now surprisingly suited my palate with its bitterness. Seeing that I had no intention of speaking, the woman finally couldn't hold back. Aren't you going to ask who I am or why I'm looking for you? I put down my coffee. Thinking of the 2 items deliberately placed in Joss's suit pocket, I curled my lips slightly. Pearl earrings and lipstick, I've already accepted your meeting gift. She seemed surprised that I remained so calm despite knowing Joss had someone else. She spoke with some disbelief, then why? Why don't I make a scene? I took over her words and looked up at her. Because I know you don't have a better card to play. These little skirmishes are just tests, not provocations. Zia, if I'm not mistaken, Joss hasn't slept with you yet, right? 5 years ago, he held his ground and drove you away. So 5 years later, what makes you think you won't humiliate yourself again? As soon as the words left my mouth, Zia across from me seemed as if a veil had been ripped away, her face instantly turning pale. I continued stirring the coffee in my cup with a spoon, but there was not a trace of satisfaction from having the upper hand. Joss and I had been together since college. The year we graduated, I brought him home, and when my parents asked about his family background, their brows furrowed. Because of my insistence, they finally relented, on the condition that Joss and I come home and accept the jobs they arranged. Joss refused. He said, Bree, though I come from an ordinary background, I have strong bones. I want to carve out a place for us on my own, so that when you need me, I can confidently say, don't be afraid, I'm here. If I were hiding under your parents' protection, I wouldn't even have the courage to say this. The light in his eyes flickered with a certainty to face the future with me, and for the first time I became a rebellious daughter. I followed Joss to a strange city and started from scratch. It took 7 years to move from a 15-square-meter cubicle to a high-end villa district. On the day of the new office building's inauguration, he got down on one knee and proposed to me, saying he could finally fulfill his promise of happiness. Everyone around said I was a winner in life, having immediately spotted Joss as a promising prospect. Even my father, who had been the strongest opponent at first, blushed and apologized to Joss on the wedding day, admitting he had misjudged him. Joss is truly good to me, he remembers all my preferences. When he's on a business trip, he video calls me every day. He takes note of the niche designer brands I casually mention and surprises me with them at unexpected times. Joss's loyalty to me is recognized as exemplary within our circle. He's handsome, broad-shouldered with a slim waist, and by his early 30s, he had already pushed his company to the forefront of the industry. Over the years, many women have tried to get close to him under the pretense of exchanging business cards or socializing. Once, at a drinking party, a female boss from a partner company slipped him a room key card, which he immediately threw into the trash. When his assistant took the drunken Joss home, she told me what had happened at the party. Joss buried his face in my neck, pouting in a tone that begged for praise. "Wifey, am I being a good boy?" The assistant, surprised to see this softer, almost childish side of the usually decisive Joss at work, quickly covered her mouth to stifle a laugh and excused herself. I somewhat amusedly and helplessly dragged Joss onto the bed to lie down. After making him some hangover soup and returning to the room, I found him sitting up. "Bree," he called my name, his eyes shining. "It's time for us to have a child." Getting pregnant was a natural progression. On the day I found out I was pregnant, Joss held me, excitedly planning everything he wanted to give the child in the future. I watched the corners of his mouth that just wouldn't come down, feeling both reassured and warm inside. I had thought this new bond of life would tie us even closer. But that night, I knelt by the toilet in the middle of the night, vomiting so violently I felt like the world was spinning. Joss stood at the bathroom door, his hand holding a towel frozen in midair, his gaze somewhat distant as it drifted toward the window. It wasn't until I called his name that he snapped out of it and hurried over to wipe me down. Joss and I have been together for so many years that I know him to the bone. His movements were as gentle as ever, but I keenly sensed that something was off. I helped him to his feet, strands of hair sticking to his sweaty neck, and asked, "Do I look terrible like this?" He poured me a glass of warm water, his palm resting on my back. "Nonsense, my wife is always the most beautiful." The warmth from his palm seeped through my clothes, just as comforting as before. Yet, in that moment, I clearly saw a flicker of emotion pass through his pupils. That fleeting dodge was like a fine needle, suddenly piercing the calm I had just restored in my stomach. I suppressed the rising nausea and turned to lean into his embrace. Lifting his hand to rest on my now noticeably rounded belly, my voice was as soft as a sigh. "Baby, do you know? Your dad is the person in the world who loves us the most." I felt Joss's arms around me stiffen abruptly, then slowly relax. A low, hoarse came from his lips. A few weeks later, I went to the office. In the break room, I overheard a senior employee warning a new hire, "Joss hasn't been in a great mood lately. If you're working in the CEO's office, you better be careful, not like that Zia before, who got fired over a tiny mistake." That was the first time I heard the name Zia. Stepping out of the tea room, I bumped into Joss coming to pick me up. His eyes were filled with concern and care, just like always. I told myself, just this once. After our daughter was born, Joss became a model stay-at-home dad. When she woke crying in the middle of the night, he was always quicker than the nanny to jump up, holding the tiny bundle as he paced the living room, then showing up at the morning meeting the next day with dark circles under his eyes. Every weekend, without fail, he turned down all social engagements, kneeling on the soft mat to build blocks with our daughter, letting her toss his expensive watch aside without a word. I carried the warmed milk over and watched him carefully feed and wipe our daughter's mouth. That lingering thorn in my heart seemed truly softened by such warmth. 3 months ago, on our daughter's birthday, Joss booked a restaurant to celebrate. My daughter and I waited for a long time, but he never showed up. I was afraid my daughter would go hungry, so I let her start eating, but she insisted on waiting for her dad to arrive. After calling Joss several times, I finally got through. On the other end of the line, Joss was breathing heavily and told me he had just hit someone with his car. My heart tightened, and I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, but the person he hit was slightly injured, and he had taken them to the hospital. I felt a wave of relief, then it sank again as I asked if he needed me to come to the hospital to help with the aftermath. But he said it wasn't necessary, he told the insurance company to handle it. After saying that, he quickly hung up the phone. When I put down the phone and met my daughter's expectant eyes, I suddenly froze. Only then did I belatedly realize that during the call, Joss hadn't asked a single word about our daughter's birthday. I comforted her, telling her that her father had an urgent matter and couldn't make it. I coaxed her into blowing out the birthday cake candles, but an inexplicable unease crept over me. Soon, my unease was confirmed. Joss's return home became increasingly irregular, and even when he was telling stories to our daughter, I often caught him lost in thought. Finally, when I found a woman's item that didn't belong to me in the pocket of his suit, my heart sank to the bottom. This time, I hired a private detective. From the information the detective brought back, I heard Zia's name once again. This is a very cliché story. A successful CEO crosses paths with a secretary whose eyes are as pure as mountain spring water, and his heart suddenly stirs for no apparent reason. But the subtle reminders from his pregnant wife make him slam on the brakes just in time, and he resolutely fires the secretary. Who would have thought that 5 years later, the CEO and the secretary would meet again? Seeing her in a mess with a broken heel on her high-heeled shoe, the CEO's quiet heart stirs once more. Upon asking, he learns that after being dismissed, the secretary's life has been far from smooth. Today, she's out meeting clients to earn medical expenses for her critically ill mother, but unexpectedly, at a drinking party, a client makes unwanted advances. She fled the drinking party in defiant refusal, only to collide with the CEO's car in her panic. Looking into the secretary's stubborn yet helpless eyes, the CEO's pity grew uncontrollably. Since then, the CEO saw the secretary more and more often. Not only did he pay a large sum for the secretary's mother's medical bills, but he also arranged for the secretary to work with one of his close friends. On her deathbed, the secretary's mother grasped the CEO's hand, urging him to take good care of her daughter. The CEO looked into the secretary's tear-red eyes and ultimately couldn't bring himself to say no. "Bree, based on the information I've gathered so far, your husband has only met with Zia in public places each time. There is currently no concrete evidence proving he has betrayed your marriage." I couldn't help but sneer as I looked at the feedback the private detective sent me. If Joss's stance was truly so firm, Zia's little schemes wouldn't have escalated to the point of reaching me. He hadn't been with Zia yet, whether it was because he didn't want to, didn't dare, or simply hadn't had the chance. I already had my answer. Whether it was fate or a premeditated plan, the fact remained that Joss had wavered twice for a woman. It was only at that moment that I understood, no matter how much I deceived myself, the thorn in my heart had never truly disappeared. And when I finally resolved to pull it out for good, suddenly it didn't hurt as much. The information the private detective sent wasn't limited to that. Among the thick stack was a portion about Zia's past, her experiences during the 5 years she was dismissed, and her relationship with her mother, who had passed away from a serious illness. Having navigated the business world for years, Joss had long developed a keen eye for reading people and discerning their true colors. Yet he stumbled with Zia. She was never the fragile flower he had imagined, one without any support to lean on. Just like now, sitting across from me in the cafe, after I saw through her intentions, she quickly composed herself and flashed me a smile full of malice. "You know? Joss told me that when your dad bowed his head to apologize in front of him back then, he said he didn't dare, but deep down he felt quite pleased. If it weren't for his disdain, he wouldn't have pushed himself so hard to carve out a future." Noticing my hand pause as I stirred my coffee, Zia's smile grew even wider. "And also, he said that in the late stages of your pregnancy, your belly was covered with stretch marks, and when he woke up in the middle of the night and saw them, he actually felt a bit scared and disgusted. He's never told you that, has he?" The sunlight outside suddenly reflected off something, shining sharply into my eyes and stinging painfully. A look of triumphant dominance appeared on Zia's face. Last week he had dinner with me and said that only in front of me did he not have to be anyone's husband or father, he was just Joss. See, he even finds it tiring to catch his breath in front of you. "Bree, do you really think Joss loves you that much?" At that moment, her tone was blatantly provocative. After Zia finished speaking, she just waited. Waiting for me to break down, waiting for my hysteria. But my reaction ultimately disappointed her. So, does Joss know you're coming to me to say these things? Seeing the frozen expression on her face, I sneered and spoke. Looks like he hasn't seen this side of you yet, huh? I took out my phone and dialed Joss. The moment the call connected, Zia's breathing lightened. Honey, you brought Lenny home, right? Tell her I'll be back to have dinner with her as soon as I finish. Joss's gentle voice came through the phone. Since he missed their daughter's birthday that day, their daughter had been sulking and refusing to talk to him when he got home. Joss coaxed her for a long time before she finally smiled again. Now, every time he calls me, he never forgets to mention Lenny. Looking back now, I'm not sure if it was to cover up his own guilt. I gave a perfunctory and then said lightly, Joss, when I went to pick up Lenny today, I ran into someone on the way. Hearing the odd tone in my voice, Joss's breath on the other end of the line clearly caught for a moment. You ran into, who? I ran into. I deliberately paused, watching Zia's instinctive nervous reaction across from me, and curled my lips in a mocking smile. I ran into Lenny's mom. She said her family went to the beach recently and had a lot of fun. How about we go on a tropical island vacation for our anniversary this time? Joss seemed to exhale in relief, then returned to his usual affectionate tone, wherever you want to go is fine, as long as you and our daughter are happy, I'm satisfied. I hung up the phone, looked up at Zia's sullen face, and said slowly, want to give it a try? See who's really on Joss's mind? It was her first time at the beach, and my daughter was thrilled. She chased crabs on the sand one moment, then dug in the sand with a little shovel the next. Joss sat under the sunshade, his fingers scrolling endlessly on his phone, his brow furrowed into a knot. Dad. My daughter ran up to him, pouting unhappily, you're not even looking at the castle I built. Joss instinctively locked his screen in a panic and forced a smile. Dad's checking company messages, but I'll come admire our little princess's masterpiece in a bit. I pulled my sunglasses down from my forehead, hiding the sarcasm in my eyes. When his daughter snuggled up to Joss, his phone suddenly buzzed with a message. Joss glanced at it and abruptly stood up, startling his daughter. He stared intently at the screen, only realizing his daughter was crying after a moment. Lenny, I'm sorry, it's Daddy's fault for not paying attention. He reached out to his daughter, but I gently pushed his hand away. I picked her up and comforted her, be good, Lenny. Your daddy has something important to take care of. Let's not disturb him, okay? Joss gave me a grateful look, then took his phone and walked to the side. The sea breeze carried his muffled voice over, don't do anything foolish. Don't be impulsive. I'm here. Each word was laced with panic. Just then, the daughter suddenly pointed towards the sea and shouted, Mom, look. Why is that lady wearing a white dress going swimming? Joss snapped his head around. As his eyes caught the white figure heading into the sea, he turned and charged straight into the water. Joss plunged into the waves like a frightened beast. The daughter clapped her hands excitedly, Mom, look. Dad is swimming so fast. I stood still, watching him recklessly grab hold of the fluttering hem of the dress and drag her back. When they emerged from the sea, Zia's head rested on his shoulder. Whether unconscious or deliberate, her arms were wrapped tightly around him. Joss was soaked through, yet he held the person in his arms as if guarding a priceless treasure. Mom. Did Dad save that lady? Dad is amazing. Dad is a hero. My daughter cheered, wanting to run over, but I held her back. She looked up at me in confusion, and I just smiled, gently stroking her head without saying a word. Over there, Joss, after carrying Zia ashore, kept holding her hand tightly. Even when they got into the ambulance, he hadn't noticed that we, mother and daughter, had been left behind and forgotten by him. Joss sat slumped on the sofa, the divorce papers I had picked up lying in front of him. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse, honey. I really didn't betray you. I smiled, Joss, in your heart, is it only physical infidelity that counts as betrayal? Joss denied desperately, no, I just. I just feel guilty. If I hadn't fired her back then, she wouldn't have had such a hard time these past few years, and neither would her mother. Did she lose an arm or a leg because you fired her? Did her mother's illness happen because of you? I interrupted him with a cold laugh. People are let go or optimized out of the company every day, many are dismissed. Why don't you feel any guilt toward them? His Adam's apple bobbed. It's different. It's different, I scoffed, they're not Zia. They wouldn't gently comfort you when you're under pressure, nor would they stand before you with red eyes saying, I only have you. You wouldn't let down all your burdens and just be Joss in front of them. Joss, at the moment you rushed into the sea to save her, what exactly were you thinking? Joss's body stiffened, his shoulders sagging. A few seconds later, he covered his face and sobbed, I admit. I was confused, but I never thought about leaving you and Lenny. Honey, please give me one more chance, okay? I shook my head. I already gave you a chance 5 years ago. Back then, I touched my pregnant belly and told myself that men sometimes stray but always come back. But what about you? I'll change. I won't meddle in Zia's affairs anymore. Joss suddenly knelt on the ground, his eyes full of regret and pleading. I looked at the man who once made me drop everything to follow him, but my heart no longer stirred even a fraction. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. Over the past 5 years, I had been numbing myself all along. Sign it, let me go, and let yourself go too, I heard my own voice say. When Joss heard Zia's name come from Bree's mouth, he let out a sigh of relief. He thought, it's good that Bree knows now. This way, he can pull himself out of this whirlpool of feelings that should never have arisen and make a clean break. He had even prepared what to say. Since he never took things to the final step with Zia, Bree would give him a chance. She was always soft-hearted, at most throwing a few tantrums, her eyes red as she told him not to make the same mistake again. But he never expected Bree to bring up divorce. Her tone was so resolute, so decisive, crushing all his escape routes into dust. Only then did Joss realize belatedly that when Bree chose to leave everything behind and go with him, it was with the same unwavering determination. He didn't understand why he had developed feelings for a passing figure in his life, especially when he already had someone by his side to accompany him for a lifetime. When Zia appeared, he didn't really pay much attention. She was a new employee, quiet, not talkative, unlike the shrewd women in the company. Joss first noticed her when he caught a male leader from another department harassing her. The helpless look in her eyes was like a drenched fledgling, and suddenly Joss felt a sharp pang somewhere in his heart. He approached with a cold face, stopped the man's inappropriate behavior, and told him to go straight to HR to handle his resignation. After the man left, Zia kept her head down, still trembling, and quietly thanked him. That helpless expression stayed in his mind, but strangely, Joss felt a bit irritated. On a whim, he transferred Zia to the president's office as his secretary. He told himself it was just a normal act of compensation for the harassment she had suffered. But when Zia came to his side, he found his gaze lingering on her more and more. Joss felt as if something was spiraling out of control. That night, Bree was vomiting violently by the toilet. Looking at her face, dulled and worn from pregnancy, Joss's mind flashed to the image of Zia bringing him coffee. That light blue dress made her skin look porcelain white. When she smiled, a small dimple appeared at the corner of her mouth, and her voice carried a shy sweetness. It wasn't until Bree grabbed his hand and placed it on her belly, feeling the life growing inside, that Joss broke out in a cold sweat. Once he recovered, he wished he could slap himself. He was the one who suggested having a child with Bree, so why was he now disgusted by Bree's pregnancy, thinking she had become unattractive? He told himself he couldn't go on like this. The next day, Joss had HR fire Zia. He never saw her once as she packed up and left. Joss thought that was the end of it. Who would have thought that 5 years later, while driving to his daughter's birthday party, Zia would suddenly rush in front of his car? Learning that she had struggled terribly after being fired, Joss felt as if something had struck him in the chest. Instinctively, he wondered if things might have been easier for Zia if he had just transferred her away instead of letting her go. Once the thought surfaced, he couldn't suppress it. Joss began introducing her to work at a friend's company and used his connections to transfer her mother to a better hospital. Gradually, he met with Zia more and more often. Joss told himself it was compensation. He was unwilling to admit that it wasn't. When he received the news by the seaside that Zia wanted to end her life, a buzzing sound went off in Joss's mind. Seeing her resolutely walk toward the sea, his brain didn't have time to think, his body reacted first. In the hospital, Zia held his hand, crying and saying she wanted to be with him. The dependence and hope in her eyes were like a net, trapping him. He almost fled in panic. Before opening the hotel room door, he had thought about confessing to Bree. But in the end, before he could speak, Bree had already sentenced him to death. Joss refused to sign the divorce papers, but I still moved out with my daughter. She hugged her doll, crouching by the entrance, watching me direct the movers. She asked, "Mom, where are we going?" I knelt down and brushed the stray hairs from her forehead. "To a place where it's just the two of us." "What about Dad?" She tilted her head, glancing at Joss who was silently standing nearby. "Isn't Dad coming with us?" I was silent for a moment, then softly said, "Dad has other things to do." She nodded, half understanding, and ran over to tug at Joss's pant leg. "Dad, you have to come soon, okay?" Joss's Adam's apple bobbed as he crouched down and picked up our daughter. "Dad. Dad will come soon." He turned to look at me, his eyes reddened, like an abandoned object. On the first night after moving to the new place, I sat by the bed telling my daughter a story. Halfway through, she suddenly asked me, "Mom, do you not like Dad anymore?" I was silent for a moment, then softly responded with a quiet "Mom and Dad no longer love each other, so we have to separate." "What does not loving each other mean?" my daughter asked. "It means not wanting to eat together anymore, not wanting to sleep together, not wanting to hold Dad's hand anymore." I wasn't sure if my young daughter understood, but I seemed to see sadness in her eyes. The news of Joss and me living apart spread. After learning the reason, some friends advised me, "Joss didn't really do anything with that woman, why can't you give him another chance?" I looked at my friend, my eyes clear. Whether he had a real relationship with Zia no longer matters. What matters is that his heart has changed. If his heart has changed, what's the point of keeping him around? My friend opened his mouth, but in the end, he just sighed and didn't try to persuade me further. Joss still used the excuse of seeing his daughter to come around. He was always competent in front of his daughter, so I never stopped him from visiting her. But when I looked into his eyes, filled with pleading, my heart remained calm without a single ripple. The news about Zia came from a friend in the circle. Always clear about her intentions, after pestering Joss for a while with no result, she decisively shifted her target. Her new prey was the friend Joss had introduced her to from his workplace. Joss's friend didn't have much self-control and soon ended up in bed with Zia. Unfortunately, that friend was also married. His wife had a fiery temper, and when she discovered her husband's affair with Zia, she caused a huge scene. She even confronted Joss, blaming him for pushing Zia into her husband's arms. She slammed the information she had gathered down in front of Joss. Joss's eyes trembled as he looked at Zia's complicated romantic past. Even during the 5 years he thought she had struggled, Zia never lacked companions. The reason she happened to crash in front of his car was because after her previous boyfriend went bankrupt, she happened to see Joss, who she had failed to win over 5 years ago, and so she had planned it all out. When Joss came to find me, it was raining. He was drenched and looked utterly miserable, his voice hoarse. "I know what Zia has done. She's nothing like I imagined." He couldn't hold back a sob. "I was so stupid, losing you over someone like her." "Joss, are you just relieved you held your ground?" I looked at him coolly. "The truth is, you're not much nobler than your friend. If I hadn't found out, you would have gradually slipped down, becoming her willing accomplice." "I won't," he instinctively retorted, but quickly lost steam. "I didn't." "You would," I cut him off. "Your special feelings for her have long crossed the line. It was me who stopped the damage in time, not you who held your ground. The real issue isn't what kind of person she is, but that your heart has already wavered. I watched the light in his eyes fade inch by inch. He was silent for a long time, so long that I lost patience and was about to turn and close the door. Then I heard him say, "Let's go handle the paperwork." I paused, then said, "Okay." He nodded, saying nothing more. His figure as he turned to leave looked even more defeated than when he arrived. When we stepped out of the civil affairs office, Joss asked if he could hold me one last time. I agreed. As he leaned close to my ear, I heard his painful sobs. "I'm sorry, Bree," he said. "It's all in the past now," I replied. I pulled away from his embrace, leaving him and the past behind in the shadows of the trees. The starlight that once shone for Joss would never rise again.